Labdien, cienījamie!
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the press, dear members of the delegation. We'll start the press conference following the meeting between the foreign ministers of Latvia and Sweden. Working languages are Latvian and English with simultaneous interpretation. We'll start with the statement of the Latvian Foreign Minister, Mr. Rinkēvičs. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We indeed just concluded a meeting with my Swedish counterpart, Tobias Billström, whom I'm happy to welcome on his first visit to Latvia in the capacity of the foreign minister. As you may imagine, we had plenty to talk about. We primarily talked about EU Council presidency priorities of Sweden, considering that one of the key issues in terms of foreign and security policy is the support to Ukraine and sanctions against Russia, special ad hoc international tribunal for the holding of those responsible for crimes of aggression against Ukraine accountable. We also talked about how Swedish presidency, together with high foreign representative of the EU, would promote various initiatives and various issues forward and coordinate them at the EU level. Secondly, we're of course going to be coordinating NB cooperation this year and support to Moldova and Ukraine, and their membership in the EU will be our priority. We'll coordinate security initiatives. We will also have joint visits, and this will be a wonderful opportunity to deepen our defense and economic relations. And last but not least, as you very well know, we talked at great length, of course, during this meeting about the Sweden's NATO membership. We talked also about the ratification, of course, of these accession protocols by the remaining two NATO countries that haven't ratified these applications as of yet. I expressed my firm support, or our firm support, to the speedy, physical and full membership of Sweden in NATO. And during the Vilnius summit, we will be able to take the necessary decisions by 32 countries, with 2 new member states taking part in Vilnius summit decisions. We of course talked about the announcements of Turkey in this context, also given what has lately happened in Sweden as well. I mean, there's nothing new to say here since Wednesday when we met last, when I hosted my colleague from Finland, the Finnish foreign minister. Basically the message is the same. What is being done by some radical people with possibly support of third countries, aimed at provoking us, are absolutely unacceptable. Any attempts to burn Quran, Bibles, any attempts to infuriate or persecute any religious groups is unacceptable. But we also had a very clear signal from the Swedish government, which claimed that the membership of Sweden and Finland is important for our regional security and for the security of the whole alliance, including Turkey as well. And hopefully a solution will be found allowing Turkey to ratify the accession protocol, both of Sweden and Finland, and the demands, legitimate demands of Turkey, will be met as well, which is very important. As we just agreed with my colleague here, the political consultation is very important, and there are no signals that the ratification process will be further stalled. So we need to explore all the diplomatic avenues in order to ensure that ratification takes place eventually. And last but not least, I would like to also underline that we naturally, of course, talked about bilateral ties and cooperation. Sweden is a big investor for Latvia. Our trade relations are blooming, and we would like to continue close bilateral cooperation in a similar manner in future. We're neighbours. We're only separated by the Baltic Sea. There's only Baltic Sea between us, and indeed we share a lot of things both historically and today as well, and we will continue close cooperation and coordination not only in scope of EU but also in NATO, and of course considering that we're the incoming presidency of the Council of Europe, we of course talked about our presidency agenda because our both countries are full members of this council. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nikevich. Now the floor is given to the Swedish Foreign Minister, please.
Well, thank you very much, dear colleague, dear Edgars. I'm very happy to be here and to meet bilaterally. Our prime ministers met already in December, and as close neighbors, we, Sweden and Latvia, share a long history of friendship, of personal ties, and also of fundamental values, but also challenges because of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which will have profound implications, and it is important that we stand together in this towards this great threat to European security. I envisage, as the Foreign Minister, a shift in Swedish foreign policy where we'll put an emphasis on Northern Europe. We have said so very clearly from the government since we took up office 4 months ago. And into this comes the question of the Nordic and the Baltic countries and the European Union. These three are the three pillars on which we base our foreign policy. And it is in this capacity and for these reasons that I'm very happy to be here, and we have had a lot of interesting talks, just as you referred to. And we look forward, after this visit, to further close dialogue and cooperation with Latvia on regional security, bilaterally, on EU, and of course also on NATO. And on this note, I would also finally like to congratulate you on taking up the chairmanship of the MB8 group, the Nordic Baltic countries group for friendship and cooperation. And I wish you all success with this, because this is an important tool also for Swedish policy. Thank you.
Paldies, ministra kungam. Vai būtu jautājumi? Lūdzu, uzdodot tos.
Thank you. If you would like to ask the question, please introduce yourself. Aaron Eglidis from Bloomberg News, please.
My question is to the Swedish Foreign Minister on the events that happened on Saturday. Are you looking into a line of inquiry of whether a third country could have been involved in provoking that? And could you explain what dialogue is like with Turkey since those events? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I don't really want to venture into any kind of speculation at this point in time. This is something which it is up to the authorities in Sweden to look into if there is a need to. As for the question of our relationship with Turkey, of course, we now have a pause when it comes to the actual discussions, but the fulfillment of the memorandum signed in Madrid last year between Sweden, Finland and Turkey are continuing. There will be no break-off in that, but we have a clear and clear-cut commitment with clear conditions and obligations laid down in the memorandum, which we are going to fulfill. And we have now done so in all the relevant parts and are very close in time to when the Turkish parliament should begin the ratification process of the Swedish and the Finnish accession protocols. Thank you.
Vai ir vēl kādi jautājumi? Ina Strazdīna, Latvijas television.
Do we have any other questions? Yes, Ina Strazdīna, Latvian television, please. Thank you, Ina Strazdīna from Latvian television. I would like to ask the question to both foreign ministers. Mr. Rinkevich, you talked about NATO membership. What can Latvia do to facilitate Sweden's membership, and are you really hoping that during the Vilnius summit, Sweden will be accepted as a full member? Mr. Billström, you mentioned the tribunal. What or where should this tribunal be established, created under which auspices in order to prosecute Russia for its war crimes in Ukraine? Let me briefly answer to your first question, which was addressed at me specifically. Well, this is an issue that we have discussed a number of times with my Turkish colleague before the Madrid summit and during my visit to Ankara. We will continue diplomatic consultations at the level of ministries and with my colleague minister, and we will continue explaining our position, and we will of course try to understand their concerns that are important for the Turkish side. And privately and publicly, I have very clearly, during the negotiations with all of our allies, underlined the importance of completing the ratification by Vilnius summit, which is the early July, so indicatively. So we have a bit more than 5 months to complete the ratification. We, of course, have to take into account that Turkey will have elections, and elections, are taking a toll, figuratively, on the ratification as well. So we need to continue explaining our position, maintaining diplomatic dialogue with Turkey, and that is what actually all NATO member states are currently engaged in and are doing, both small and big countries that are interested in resolving sort of the ratification issue in a respectful and respected manner, both respecting the legitimate interests of Turkey as well as the interests of Sweden and Finland and the whole alliance, of course.
Thank you very much. Well, as a question on the ad hoc tribunal, Sweden has expressed its support for a special tribunal for the crime of aggression. And we recognize, of course, that there are complicated legal issues to solve on this, but the aim has to be to solve them. As presidency of the European Union, we will work very hard to ensure EU unity on the need for accountability for crimes committed in and against Ukraine, and that we can move ahead in support of a judicial solution to the crime of aggression. Of course, it is obvious that there needs to be a broad support from the international community in favor of this. That will be key, and we need to work within the UN, because this is definitely a multilateral issue. And it is also important to support the ICC, that is the International Criminal Court, in its continued efforts. So these two have to be related to one another. Thank you.
Paldies, vai jautājumi vēl būs? Jā, Matīs,
Do we have any other questions? Yes, Mati Sensos from Latvian television.
One more about this incident in front of the Turkish embassy in Stockholm. What are your thoughts on this? Was this done with the intention of jeopardizing Sweden's NATO application, because new information is coming in every day about the persons who are behind it, and there are some signs that Russia could be behind it? What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much. Well, as I said before, I don't really feel the need to speculate about this at this point in time. In Sweden, we have independent authorities within the judiciary systems that, if needs be, will look into this. We have, of course, freedom of expression in Sweden, and that is something which everybody can use. But I would like to underline that the Swedish government does not in any way endorse or encourage events of this kind. The burning of holy scriptures is, of course, something which is alien to me personally as a foreign minister. I don't believe in that. But again, we have a right to freedom of expression in Sweden, and that also have to be brought into this context. Thank you.
Gatis Suhoveckis, TV3, lūdzu.
Hello, Gatis. I have a question for both ministers. What makes you think that Turkey eventually will change its attitude towards Sweden's accession to NATO, if that is the case? And if I may ask Mr. Rinkevich to answer in Latvian, please. Thank you. Paldies.
Tobias, please. It's difficult. But for me, preparing in English, yeah. Well, thank you very much for the question. Well, we have an agreement that was signed during the summit of Madrid, a trilateral memorandum signed by Sweden, by Finland, and by Turkey. It is very clear, it is open, it is not secret in any way. It lays down clear conditions that needs to be met by all parties, and we have constantly, ever since the memorandum was signed, done our best to fulfill all the commitments. We believe that we have done so, and we are close to the point when the Turkish parliament should be able to start the ratification. I believe that you should keep your agreements. We have signed up to an agreement, and I think that we will be able to see this ratification process come forth. After all, we have 28 member states behind us within the NATO family that in a speed that is unprecedented in the history of NATO has already ratified the Swedish and the Finnish accession protocols, among them the United States Senate. So I do believe that we have a very clear group and a very large group of member states behind us in our endeavors to become members. It is only Hungary and Turkey that lacks for this number to be full and have all 30 members ratifying the protocol. So we are very clear in our ambitions, and we are optimistic that this will also be the case. Thank you.
Man gandrīz var atlikt tikai pārtulkot un pateikt.
Well, the only thing I can do is actually translate what my colleague said and just, present it as my own opinion. But let me highlight some of the dimensions that my colleague touched upon. First of all, prior to Madrid summit, there were quite big doubts. In fact, when I flew to Madrid, I didn't know whether the Finnish, Swedish and Turkish leaders will be able, together with NATO's Secretary General, achieve some kind of agreement, and the drama about the invitation to become members of NATO might have even turned into something even worse. But the agreement was nevertheless achieved. It is being implemented or followed. Both Sweden and Finland are, respecting or meeting their commitments laid down in the memorandum of understanding. However, what complicates this situation is political and historical issues, but most of the commitments have been met nevertheless that have been laid down in this memorandum of understanding, clearly showing that Sweden and Finland are serious about their membership in NATO. Secondly, when the decision to invite Finland and Sweden into NATO was adopted, both heads of states and governments and foreign ministers understood that this is for the common benefit and also for the benefit of Turkey, and Turkish officials understood that quite well, I suppose. So NATO expansion is taking place under rather extreme geopolitical conditions, and it is therefore very important to make sure it's successful. And also the past experience, last but not least, is important here. You might remember a couple of years ago we talked about defense planning issue where we need to take into account the interests of the Baltic countries and Poland, as well as southern countries, including Turkey. It took us quite a while to actually, within the alliance, get the consensus, but at the end of the day, eventually Turkey and the rest of the alliance member states were very responsible, not forgetting about their interests, but also bearing in mind the common goals of the whole alliance. We have to be patient. This takes time. There is a certain, political and emotional background that you have to take into account. Nevertheless, we'll be able to find, I am sure, a decision that suits everyone, all the member states, Latvia, Sweden, Turkey, the UK, the United States, because we are a family of responsible countries and we treat this with utmost responsibility. Thank you, gentlemen. Do we have any other questions? Thank you. There are no questions. Thank you all. This concludes the press conference.